Before we jump in and really start working with Resolve, I think it's pretty important to go over the main things that you need to be successful here. This will just make sure that we're all on the same page. And if you do run into problems technically, maybe you can have a little bit of a clue why. The very first thing that I think is really important when we're working with Resolve is you have to have a pretty good system. And when I say a good system, that's kind of subjective, but like ideally would be something like a gaming PC, something with a really good graphics card, with lots of storage space, plenty of RAM. That's the kind of PC that you generally need to do any kind of video production, any kind of multimedia production in general. The newer M1 Macs are very good with Resolve. Of course, the more expensive and, spec'd out the system, the better. So here's a fair warning. If you don't have a somewhat recent computer, something that was built in the last few years, or something like a M1 MacBook or Mac Pro or iMac, you might have a little bit of trouble playing stuff back. A lot of our footage and media has been optimized to run on even lower end PCs, but again, if you have some trouble, that might be why. The next major thing is you definitely need Resolve. This is obvious, but if you haven't yet, make sure to go to blackmagicdesign.com and under support, click on Resolve.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
And download the very latest update. The regular Resolve is free, and the paid version is called Studio. The version I'm going to be working with is 17.4.1. It's not going to be a whole lot different if you're on like 17.6 or something like that, but this is what I'm working with today. Whatever it is, click on your operating system. If you have the free version, you need to put in your details. If you're on Studio, you can skip it and just say download only. But make sure you get that. Double click on this installer and follow all the instructions to make sure you have the latest version of Resolve. I'm going to be working with Resolve Studio, which is the paid version, but everything that we're covering is available in the free version. So if you don't have the paid version, don't worry. This training is going to work perfectly well for you too. The next thing you need isn't necessarily something that you need, but is really helpful. If you have some experience with video editing or even audio production, a lot of the concepts, even from other apps, are going to translate to Resolve really well. So if you're familiar with how timelines work or trimming and editing video, you're going to have kind of a leg up with this training. That said, this is an intro. This is a beginner training. So we are going to be starting from pretty basic principles and building on those. The last thing that you definitely need is some dedicated time to work through this. Not only time just to watch through the videos, but also to put in some practice and to really try and cement these concepts in your brain. I can teach you all kinds of things about Resolve, but your experience is what's really going to make the difference. So don't be afraid to jump in, mess with sliders, and break stuff. That's how we learn. So if you're feeling pretty good about those things, let's jump in and talk about how this training is structured in the next video.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
Why, hello. My name's Casey Ferris. I'd like to welcome you to the Introduction to DaVinci Resolve 17 training. We've been working on this class for a really long time, and I'm really excited to jump into the basics of Resolve with you. I'm confident that no matter what kind of experience you have with Resolve, you're going to have a really good time, and we're going to learn a ton about how post-production works inside of Resolve, and not only just how to use the tools, but why they're there and why we do some of the post-production things that we do. Before we get started, I really want to thank you for buying this training. I really appreciate you spending your hard-earned money on this, because this allows us to keep making multiple YouTube videos a week and to continue making projects like the one that is featured in this training, Tuesday on Earth. So here is a huge thank you from all of us and our families at Release the Hounds. Thank you so much. Let's jump in. This is going to be really fun. Grab some coffee or tea and let's get started.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lích về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Welcome back. In this chapter, we're going to be taking a look at how to use this training, kind of how we've actually structured this to be the very best way to learn Resolve. All of the videos in this training are kind of split up into three categories. The first one is concepts. I'm really excited to go over these concepts because these are really kind of the major big things that you learn when you've been working with Resolve every single day. These are really the great big concepts that are really important, but you don't quite wrap your head around until you either have a lot of experience or somebody specifically lines it out for you. And that's what we're going to be doing here. We've identified some of the major concepts that help people learn Resolve so that you not only know what buttons to push and sliders to move, but the big ideas behind why you're doing each thing. The next category is lessons. These are the traditional kind of screencast tutorials. This is where you'll actually follow along with me and dig into the Resolve interface, change controls, move clips around, that kind of thing. And the third category is troubleshooting. Have you ever went through a tutorial and things don't really work the way that they work in the tutorial, and then you get lost and frustrated? I've definitely been there, and so I'm going to do my very best to go over some of the main gotchas, the main things that kind of come up whenever we're going through a lesson. So if you're having trouble with one section, it'd be really good to look at the troubleshooting video. We're going to have each of these categories for almost every lesson in the training. And the idea here is that you can kind of self-pace. If you feel like you have a lot of the concepts, maybe you've used other software, maybe you're pretty familiar with how video editing works, you just want to figure out how it works in Resolve, you might just want to watch the lessons, and that's totally okay. Maybe everything works great for you and you don't really need to watch the troubleshooting. That's okay too. But for the most bang for your buck and the widest, most useful knowledge of how Resolve works, you can go through the concepts, the lessons, and the troubleshooting for each chapter. We've also set up a Discord server, and that's a place where you can ask questions, you can connect with other people who have taken the training, and we can really get you some more custom support for going through this training. Because all of this, the concepts, the lessons, the troubleshooting, the Discord, all of that is designed to help you learn and be confident making things that you want to make inside of Resolve. In the next lesson, we'll go over a little bit more in the Discord. So if you're interested in that, check out the next video. If you just want to jump in, go ahead and skip over to chapter 2.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
Welcome to chapter 2, which is when we're actually going to start jumping into learning specifically about Resolve. In this lesson, we're going to look at our very first concept, which is what is Resolve? Like, what does it actually do? Well, Resolve is designed to be a complete post-production tool. What that means is that basically everything that you do after you're done with shooting, you can do in Resolve. So that's everything from managing your media, copying files from your camera card onto your system, organizing your footage, tagging it with information, renaming it, doing all of those kind of things. That can all happen in Resolve. Editing timelines, putting things together as a story, as a cohesive video, that happens in Resolve. Color correction and creative color looks, audio mixing and sound effects, visual effects like explosions and fire and fog, putting different layers together, kind of the stuff that you would generally use in image editing program, you can do that in Resolve. Motion graphics and animations happen in Resolve, and even your final render for putting your project on YouTube or sending to Netflix or whatever you're doing. All of this kind of happens inside of Resolve. Traditionally, the way that things worked, where you might have your media app or somebody who's managing media, they might do that in the editing app. But let's say we have that goes into the editing app. You do all of your editing, you put everything all together, and then you bring some shots into your compositing app and you do graphics, you do effects and everything. And when I say bring things into a compositing app, I mean render them out, make new video files and bring them into your compositor. And then you'd make new video files from that and bring them back into your editing app. And once you were happy with all of your edits, you could take your edits and bring them out to your color app and maybe do your audio mixing in your audio app. And then again, those would usually go back to your editing app, and your color would also go back into your editing app. And then once everything was put together again in your editing app, you would put that out to a rendering app of some kind. Or you might be able to render from the editing app itself. But you can see how things get a little complicated going in between programs for different jobs. And the idea with Resolve is that all of those things happen in the same app. Resolve is kind of a one-stop shop for anything post-production. If you want to do color correction, you can do color. If you want to do editing, you can do editing. And you can do any or all or only one of all of these major post-production tasks inside of Resolve. And the good news is you don't need to know everything about all of these to use it. If you're just into editing and you don't care about doing really fancy audio mixes or really fancy color or even graphics or whatever, you just want to get a quick edit done, Resolve can do that. If you want to get super intense with your effects and composite CG things and make, blockbuster movie effects, you can do that in Resolve and you don't have to worry about all the other stuff. And the cool thing is that all of this stuff is available in the free version. There isn't a big part that's limited with getting DaVinci Resolve versus Resolve Studio. There are some fancy things that you can do in Resolve Studio that you can't do inside of the free version, but they're pretty minimal. And for like 90% of what you would ever do, the free version would work great. So again, if you're used to this kind of workflow, Resolve is going to be a breath of fresh air for you. If you've never really done a whole lot of video post-production, well, I guess you can just appreciate that this is how things have always been. And this is sort of when, your granddad says that you're spoiled because you don't have to walk uphill both ways to school in the snow. And having worked this way for a really long time, I'm very excited to work with an app like Resolve that can do everything, and it does everything really well. So that's our first major concept. Resolve is a complete post tool.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng
Welcome
phim.
back. We're going to dive right into another major concept with post-production, and that is that post-production knowledge for a certain app will actually translate into other apps. So this is really good news if you know something like Adobe Premiere or Avid or Final Cut, or even something like an audio app like Pro Tools. A lot of the knowledge that you learned is pretty much the same in Resolve. It's just kind of a little bit of a different flavor. It's almost like a different language, but the big ideas are still there. So let's go back to our multiple app example. Anything that you've learned in your editing app will translate to editing inside of Resolve. Same with color correction. Color correction generally works about the same whether you're working in Resolve or a different app. Same thing with audio. This is especially true with audio. The tools are almost exactly the same in the Fairlight page of Resolve as they are in something like Pro Tools or Adobe Audition. And I'll probably be making references throughout this training to the similarities of parts of Resolve to software that you might have used. Again, if you haven't used post-production software, it's really not a big deal. The good news here is that the things that you learn in Resolve, if you sometime want to learn a different app, or maybe you're worried that if I learn Resolve, what if I need to maybe get a video editing job using something like Premiere? Anything that you learn in the editing portion of Resolve is probably going to pretty easily translate over to Premiere. And I say this from experience because I actually learned other apps before I learned Resolve. And when I opened up Resolve, I was like, oh, this is just like this other app. This is especially true for things like, again, the edit page and Premiere or Final Cut, things like the Fusion page and After Effects or Apple Motion, the Fairlight page and Audition or Pro Tools, the color tools and things like Lumetri Color or the color correction effects in Final Cut. And even the process of rendering inside of Resolve is very similar to working with something like Adobe Media Encoder or Apple Compressor. So this is really cool because you're not only learning Resolve, you're actually learning kind of the basics of how post-production works in general. Next, we're going to do one more concept and then we're going to dive into actually working with the Resolve interface.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
Welcome back. In this section, we're going to be talking about the general workflow of post-production inside of Resolve and how you take a project from beginning to end all inside of the app. So we've been talking about all of the different things that you do in post-production, from color correction to editing to media management to graphics and effects, all of this stuff, and how it all happens inside of Resolve. But the way that you do it in Resolve is sort of in a specific order. And again, this is really kind of the order of post-production in general. So the first thing that happens is you obviously record your footage. After that, you're going to do some kind of media management. And so that's taking your footage from your camera cards and putting them on your system somehow. It's organizing them into folders, whether that's actually folders on your system or even just inside of your editing app. You're getting organized in some way. Next comes the editing phase, where you actually take your media and you decide what parts of it you want to use, what parts you want to throw away, and the order that things are supposed to go in so that you can make a story. From there, generally, you'll go to do your effects if there is anything that you need to change about a shot. So let's say you need to clone out a person in a wide shot that you didn't really want to be there, or it's even doing fancy things like adding lasers and lightsabers and all of that stuff. That would happen after editing so that you know what parts of each clip you need to actually do the effects on. Graphics, I put here, they don't really have to be necessarily here, but they generally will happen in the same app that does effects because the tools used to make motion graphics are a lot of the same ones that you'd use to make effects. And they generally happen in the same type of app. And you won't usually make your graphics before you make your edit. Again, you kind of want to know what graphics you need, what little beats in the story you need those things for. Once your editing is done and all of your effects and everything are together and your story pretty much works and looks mostly the way it should, then you go into color. Color is all about kind of the final tweaks, making sure everything looks visually how it's supposed to. That means 2 different shots that were shot with different exposures, you balance out the exposure. It means if a shot is supposed to look like it's nighttime and it's really bright, that you darken it down. And that all the shots kind of look like they belong together in the same world. That all happens during color correction, again, after all of your visual stuff is put together. Then we have audio, and this can happen alongside color if you want. It doesn't necessarily have to happen after or before color. It does have to happen after your effects and graphics and editing are done. Because sometimes you'll have an effect like an explosion, and you won't know when the explosion happens until you have the effect done. And so that's when your audio mix, or at least your final audio mix, is finished. And then all of that stuff goes together in the same timeline and it's rendered. Rendering is basically just taking everything that you have in your project and making it so somebody can actually see it. So it's making it into a file for YouTube or that you can play back on a computer, or even making something like a DVD. That process of converting all of these pieces into something that you can actually watch or distribute is called rendering. And that's really how you take a project from you recorded something all the way through getting organized, editing your story together, making sure all the effects and graphics are there. It looks the way it should, it sounds the way it should, and now somebody can actually watch it. And no matter what kind of workflow you're using, stuff pretty much happens in that order. And how that works in Resolve is each of these major jobs of post-production is assigned to a page. A page is like a section of Resolve that is dedicated to one of these jobs. So media management, renaming things, adding notes to things, previewing clips, putting them in folders, making sure everything is where it should be, is media management, and that happens in the media page. Editing happens in the cut or the edit pages. All of these pages we're going to go over here in a few minutes, but it's important that you kind of understand why these are split up like this. The effects and graphics, together I would call that compositing. That happens inside of the Fusion page. That's, again, a dedicated interface to make really cool, fancy stuff like effects and graphics. Color correction happens in the color page. Audio happens in the Fairlight page. And all the rendering happens in the Deliver page. And you generally go from left to right because that's sort of the order that kind of has to happen. You can't really manage media until you record it. You can't really edit anything until you have media, and so on. So let's take a look at the Resolve interface. We're going to look at how to set up a project here in a minute. But for now, take a look down here at these pages. These should look familiar. Media, Cut, Edit, Fusion, Color, Fairlight, and Deliver. And as you click on each page at the bottom of the interface will change to focus on whatever post-production job the page is designed for. So color, we have all of the color correction tools. For editing, we have timelines, and you can get to your media. In the media page, it's all about finding media on your system and previewing it, and looking at all of the information for your media. Fusion is about doing really fancy things with nodes, which we'll get into in a little bit. Fairlight is all about audio mixing and audio effects and things like that. The Deliver page is about taking your final project and exporting it so people can see it. And each of these pages not only is a different layout, it's literally like a different app built into Resolve. In fact, Fairlight for a long time has been a standalone audio workstation. Kind of like you think of Pro Tools, Fairlight is its own thing, and now it's integrated into Resolve. Same thing with Fusion. Fusion has been kind of its own thing, sort of like After Effects or Nuke. It's a really high-end compositing app that's now built inside of Resolve and available for free. So each of these pages has a specific focus on post-production, and it's not just laid out to do it, but it actually has kind of a different engine under the hood to drive those kind of things. But here's what's really cool about having this all together in Resolve. Not only can Resolve do all of these things, but all of these things share the same timeline, and you don't have to render things out and export them in between your different apps. So normally what you would do is take your editing app and export into your compositing app and make a new video. And then you do all of your stuff in your compositing app and make a new video and put it in the editing app. And then you make a new video and put it into the color app. And then you make a new video and bring it back into your editing app. And then you make a new video, and so it gets really wild doing that. In Resolve, I can do my editing in the edit page, but if I want to be really detailed and meticulous on my audio, I can just click on the Fairlight page. And now I'm in crazy audio mode, where I can go in and get insanely detailed with my audio. If I want to focus on color correction, I don't load effects or, do my color correction in the edit page. I just switch over to the color page and I can do my color without having to render or do anything crazy. I can just do some color adjustments and then switch back over to the edit page and keep editing. And so it's really fast. If I want to do something fancy in the Fusion page, I can just switch over to Fusion and work on the shot that I was over in the edit page. Say I want to add some fog. I can add that fog in the Fusion page and switch back over to edit. And there it is in my timeline. Again, I don't have to render or do anything weird. It all kind of lives here in the timeline. And the timeline is shared in between all of these different pages.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
So what's really neat is that even though these are laid out in the traditional order, you don't actually really have to use them in the traditional order. You can kind of move back and forth as you please. You could do some editing and then do some basic color correction and do a little bit more editing and then go work on the audio and then go and mess with your effects and then go back to editing and then do the audio for those effects. It's really up to you, and it gives you a lot more freedom when it comes to your workflow for post-production. So that's really the first major concept of Resolve specifically, is that it's split up into pages and each page has a very specific job and they all share a timeline together to make things a little bit more easy and give you a lot of freedom to be creative.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Your project settings are really important, and it's going to really depend on what kind of project you're working on. We're going to set up our project settings for what we're generally working on in this training, and I'll give you some tips for setting them for your own projects. Down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's this little cog icon, and that's called Project Settings. So when we click that, that brings up the settings for our project. Now, this isn't how every single project is going to work. This is just for the one that we're working on right now. And there's a lot to look at here in this panel. We'll just take a look at the most important need-to-know stuff. A big one here is timeline format. This is the resolution and frame rate for the project that you are creating. Most of the time, settings like these are probably going to be pretty good. The only thing you want to be really sure of is your frame rate. You can't change the frame rate of your timeline after you've added media to the timeline. You have to do it before. So whatever frame rate you're working in, make sure to set that here. The frame rate we'll be working with is 23.976, but you can choose whatever you're working on in your project. The frame rate that you choose here will usually be the frame rate that you shot with, unless you're trying to do something crazy. Most of the time, this is either 23.97, 24, 29.97, or 30. If you're doing something like gaming videos, you might have recorded at 60 frames a second, in which case you would select 60. But most of the time you'll set this for what most of your footage is shot at. The timeline resolution is important, but you can actually change this after you put stuff in the timeline, so it's a little bit less essential than the timeline frame rate. But again, you want to generally set this to whatever your output is. So if you are rendering a full HD video for YouTube, set this to 1920 by 1080. There are a lot of different drop downs here. Some of these are not available in the free version of Resolve. For instance, something like 8K Ultra HD, that's only available in the studio version. But if you want to do UHD, you can click that. Most of the time, for most things I do, it's 1920 by 1080.
at 23.976.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân
Down
từ
here
group
under
tài
video
nguyên dựng
monitoring,
phim.
this is only stuff that you would worry about if you had an external monitor. Something's hooked up with a special Blackmagic card. There are some other things to look at here in the master settings, but the most important section here is the timeline format. If you know a little bit about video codecs and that kind of thing, you can set your preferred video codecs here in the Optimize Media and Render Cache. I would especially pay attention to the render cache format. Most of the time, the defaults are going to be pretty good if you have a decent computer. I'd also take a look at the working folders because these are where it's going to put kind of the extra files that Resolve makes on your system. And you want to make sure that this is on a hard drive that has plenty of room and is fast enough. And I think it defaults to your C drive, which might not be ideal depending on your system. But as far as the essential project settings, that's pretty much all I change most of the time. Once you feel good about everything here, go ahead and hit that save button. And now we have our project set up.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
All right, let's take a look at a concept that I feel like a lot of people skip over and can kind of be frustrating. And that's how project files work, how media is stored on your system, and kind of how those things work together. Anytime that you make a new project in Resolve, it becomes a project file. Now, this project file contains a bunch of stuff about what you're making. So it has the metadata, it has bins, it has everything about how your media is organized in Resolve. It has your timelines, your color correction, your graphics, your composites, your effects, all of your audio adjustments, and a lot of your settings. All of that lives inside of a project file, and that project file is really small on your system because it's basically just a bunch of text under the hood that describes everything that you're doing to your media. On your hard drive is where kind of the big media lives. So it's not inside of your project file, it's just sitting on your hard drive somewhere. And that's your media files, the things that you recorded, audio, video, pictures, stills, whatever, as well as the render files that Resolve will make, which we can get into in a little bit, as well as proxies, which are like lower resolution versions of your media that make it easier to play back, as well as basically anything that you import, anything that you drag into Resolve or that you import in the media pool. All of that stuff doesn't really live in your project. Your project just has a reference to it. So your project knows once you give it media with a certain name, you're going to put it into a certain timeline at a certain place and do color correction to it, do some audio adjustments to it. It has all of that info. But the actual media file itself, the video files that you recorded, live on your hard drive. So if you want to say move your project from one system to another, you have to both have your project file as well as all of your media. And anytime that you're working in Resolve, this is what's happening. There's a project file that's being written to, and there are media files on your hard drive, and they kind of work together. Now, if you do want to take all of this and move it to a different system, you have two options. You can export the project, which is, again, just the project file, and then take all of your media from your hard drive and put them all on, say, a thumb drive, and copy that to another computer, open up your project and tell it where all of the media files are on your new computer. Or you can make something called a DaVinci Resolve archive. Now, an archive has everything that you need. This will actually combine what is normally in your project file as well as what's on your hard drive, and it will put it all into one big folder. So it'll say, do this to all of the media and copy all of the media into this one folder and package that up into one folder so that when you move this archive to a different system, it knows exactly where everything is supposed to be. Now, the reason I'm going over this is because one thing that we're going to be doing is working with a DRA archive. That's how we're going to be opening up our work files. But once you import this DRA, it turns it into a regular project with references to files on your hard drive. If you open it from an archive, the files will be in the .dra folder, but you won't actually be working from the DRA. You're going to be working from a duplicate project inside of Resolve that just looks at the media files inside of that folder. So that's kind of the overview about how projects and media and stuff is stored. Pretty helpful to know if you're going to be doing a lot of work in Resolve.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
All right, it's time to open up Resolve and start with a new project. When you first open Resolve, you'll have something that looks a little bit like this, and this window is called your project manager. And this is a list of all of the projects that you have open. You can make new folders and drop them into folders, that kind of thing. But if you've never opened Resolve before, this would just be blank. And we can start things out by just going down here and saying new project. It'll ask for a name. We'll just call this chapter 3 and hit create. And now we have our project open and we're ready to get to work.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Now that we have our project open, let's take a look at some of the most important project settings. But I want to spend just a minute and talk about this concept of project settings. There are two places that you can find settings inside of Resolve. The first place is down in the lower right-hand corner, this little settings cog, and that is your project settings. The other place is in the upper left-hand corner under DaVinci Resolve, under preferences. And it's really easy to confuse these. In fact, half the time I don't know if something is in the project settings or in the preferences, but the general idea is that the settings for whatever you're doing for your specific project live in the project settings. That's things like how big your frame is, what is your frame rate, what kind of media are you working with? Stuff that's really specific to the type of video you're trying to make right now. Up here in the preferences, this is stuff that is more system-wide. It's stuff with how your computer works, installing plugins, things with your hardware, as well as general things about how Resolve works, what the interface is like, how it handles various little default things. That all kind of happens up in the preferences. But the project settings, those all have to do with the actual project that you're working on right now. So again, that's the basic concept of project settings versus system settings. Might seem obvious, but this trips me up a lot.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Now let's take a look at some important preferences that you might want to look at. Depending on your system and how things are set up and your general preferences, your preferences might want to be set to something that's specific. So let's go. Get it? Preferences? Okay. So you can find the preferences up here under DaVinci Resolve, under Preferences, and this is all about how Resolve works and how your system works. Whereas your project settings are more about your specific project, this is more about kind of Resolve in general. So under System, it's important to probably just page through this just to double check and make sure nothing looks totally weird. One thing you definitely want to check out is your memory and GPU. Make sure that it's using all of the memory that you want it to use. Make sure that it's using your GPU. Make sure these are clicked and that it recognizes your GPU. If it doesn't, if your GPU doesn't show here, you might need to update your video drivers. Under media storage, what I like to do is have a folder for our cache. The cache is basically where Resolve will put a bunch of random files that it needs to think about stuff. And that needs to be in a place that one has a whole lot of room and two can be accessed pretty fast. So you probably wouldn't want to put this on like a really slow thumb drive or something. You want to make sure it's on a nice fast hard drive with plenty of room.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
The rest of this here is under video plugins. If you want to add in specific OpenFX plugins, under audio plugins, if you want to add VST effects, this is where you can tell Resolve where those plugins are. Control panels is where you can select the different types of panels that Blackmagic makes and tell them that those exist and to use them. If you don't have a panel, don't worry about it. And one other thing I'd like to point out is internet accounts here. This is where you can actually sign in to YouTube or Vimeo or Dropbox or whatever so that you can directly upload to your account using Resolve. And this is something I use all the time. You can just click this to sign in and it will pop up a little window and ask you to sign in that I'm not going to show you because, you know, secrets. But that's how you would do that. And you can enable it to directly upload to these things in the deliver page. So those are the system preferences. There's also the user preferences, which are over here. And this is a lot more stuff that isn't so important. It's more just kind of like what you prefer, like your default settings for if you drag something to the timeline, and a lot of stuff that if you're new to Resolve, you probably don't know which of these you like or don't like yet, but this is where all of that stuff exists. But again, I think the most important thing is memory and GPU and media storage when it comes to the preferences.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi leak về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Welcome to chapter 4. In this section, we're going to be talking about the media page. And we're going to start out with just the basic concept of what the media page is and what it's really used for. The media page in general is where you just get organized. It's where you import new media, preview it, and make sure that everything is named and organized just right. The basic idea here is that before you add anything to a timeline, before you start editing, you can grab a piece of media and preview it and learn everything you can about it, from how many audio channels there are, to what it looks like, how long it is, to everything about the actual video file, from the name and the location all the way to the video format and the audio format, as well as all these other details. Not only that, but you can organize things into folders and name them and just get as crazy as you want with your preparation. This is also the place where you can navigate your system and preview all the different shots before you even put them in your project. This is a lot faster than opening up each piece of media, and it's a lot cleaner than importing them all and then deleting them later. What I really use the media page for is often just finding media on my system, bringing it in and making sure that everything is kind of labeled the way that I want and kind of setting myself up for success in editing later. The media page, like most other pages in Resolve, you don't have to use it, but it is a really good tool set if you want to get organized.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi leak về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Let's take a look at the interface of the media page. Right now I have our work project open just to show you some of the interface so that it makes a little bit of sense. And then we're going to walk through actually importing some media in the next lesson. But let's start with the obvious. Right here is our main viewer. And this is where we can preview any kind of media, whether it's video or audio. We can do that by just double clicking on any of these thumbnails that show up here or here. And we can scrub through and take a look at what our footage is. This lower section here is called our media pool. The media pool is where everything is imported to when you put it into the project. So any kind of media that is actually in your project lives in the media pool. So in this project, we have a bunch of footage imported, and we can take a look at each one by double clicking on it and loading it into the viewer. I can also just mouse over it and kind of scrub throughout this thumbnail and take a look at it really quickly.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc
In the
Tân
upper
từ
left
group
here, we
tài
have our
nguyên dựng
media
phim.
storage. Now, these kind of sound similar, media storage and media pool. And the media pool is where all of your media is stored. But here's the way that I look at it. Media storage is where it's actually physically stored. So like we talked about in one of our earlier concepts lessons, all of your media is actually stored on your hard drive. And so this is a way to look at the media that's on your hard drive, and the media pool is the media that's imported into the project, which again still lives on the hard drive, but your project is actually looking at it. Whereas up here in the media storage, you're just kind of navigating to different files on your computer. So here I can have terabytes and terabytes of media, but they don't actually exist in the project until I grab one and drag it into the media pool. Now I have this clip inside of our project. Over here on the right side of our interface, we have our audio meters. So if I bring up a clip and scrub through it, we can see these little meters popping up here. And this is a great way to know what channels you have in your piece of media, because a video could have, 16 channels of audio. And that's a great visual way to actually know what the heck is going on and how loud they are. Below the meters, we have our metadata. This metadata panel is all of the details about whatever clip we have selected. So I'll double click on this clip. That'll bring it up here in our metadata panel. and I can see quite a bit of information about what the heck this is. In fact, there's even more information if I go up here to this little drop down. This is just the clip details. You can actually add quite a bit of information by selecting any of these other ones. So for instance, shot and scene, if I click this, I can actually add a description or comments or keywords or a whole bunch of stuff and tag this clip with all of this information. So depending on how crazy we want to get, we can scrub through this clip and kind of write a little report about what happens, which for some workflows, you know, if you're working with a bunch of people or it's going to be a really long time before you look at this shot again, that might be really useful. So we can do something like the kids approach the crash site. We could add some comments, 3 takes in this one. And we can get just as detailed as we want to get, which we are going to actually look at here in a little bit. There are some more panels kind of behind these other ones, but this is really the major interface inside of the media page. This is the stuff that you're going to use most often. So we have the viewer up here. We have the media pool where all of our media for our project lives. We have our media storage that navigates through anything on our whole computer. We have our audio meters and our metadata panel. And now you should know enough to kind of get around in the media page.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Now that we're somewhat familiar with how the media page works, let's take a look at a couple of the gotchas, a couple things that sort of throw people off when it comes to the media page. First big thing we sort of talked about, but just for super clarity, this stuff up here in the media storage, you can preview stuff, but it's not actually in your project. So sometimes you can navigate to this and look at all of your footage, and then you go to edit and all of your media seems like it disappears. Well, it was never really in your project anyway. Remember, the only place where your media actually lives in your project is in the media pool. Next thing that trips people up is if a panel is hidden. So in Resolve, in the upper corners, we have all these little icons. And if you click on them, they will show and hide different panels. If they're bright white, the panel is showing, and if they're gray, the panel is hidden. So you can have an interface that looks like this, and you go, oh man, where are all those things that Casey's talking about? You probably just have the panels hidden. So if you don't see something, make sure to check and make sure that it's white here in the upper parts. The other thing that throws people off sometimes is the metadata. You'll be looking for something like, oh, where is shot and scene and take? Man, that would be really great to put in the keywords or comments or description, but I can't find them here. Well, what often happens is we're on the wrong group here. So we can be on clip details and we're scrolling up and down going, where are the places that I can actually add the data? That's because you got to go here and select shot and scene, or if you don't know what it is, you can just click on all groups, and then you can see every single piece of metadata that you could possibly read or write to a file, and it's a lot.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim.
If something's hidden, that's how you find it. The other thing that sometimes happens is if you want to look at thumbnails, but it looks like this, you can go to these little icons here, and these again are common throughout Resolve. There's 3 little views. There's list view, thumbnail view, and metadata view. So we've mostly been working in thumbnail view. We can also click on metadata view, which is sort of a hybrid between thumbnails and the list view. These kind of give little cards that tells you the date and the time code, as well as a little thumbnail. And like I said, these little icons are common. We also have them here in the media storage. This list view is also a great way to look at all of the metadata for the clips all at once. If you can't find a little section here, you can right click and make sure that you are showing the column that you want. So if you can't find the resolution, let's say, make sure you click on the resolution so that you know what the heck is going on. So there's some basic troubleshooting for the media page.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Before we jump right into the media pool, I think it's important that we take a look at one of the major concepts of kind of how the media pool treats files. So every video file has kind of its own properties, and those are determined by how you record it. So any kind of video clip has its own frame rate, resolution. It usually captures the date it was recorded, and some cameras will even write additional information like the type of lens you use, the time of day, whatever scene it is. It kind of just depends on your camera, but there's a bunch of information that lives in the file. And when you import it into the media pool, all of that information comes in, and Resolve treats each clip by default however it comes in. But in the media pool, you can actually change some of that information. For instance, this might come in at 30 frames a second, but in the media pool, we can add a little note that says, play this back at 24 frames a second. We can also add information like, this is scene 4, shot 3, take 2. And we can add information like this for each individual file.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group
Not only changing the information that was written from the camera, but also adding our own notes. For instance, this clip we can tag as a wide shot of a certain person. We can label it a good or a bad take. There's all kinds of cool stuff that we can do. And all of that information lives in your Resolve project, and it's attached to each piece of media in the media pool. It doesn't actually change the file. It just kind of changes the notes that are stuck to the file inside of Resolve. This is all stuff that we're going to get into a little more, but it's pretty important to have this kind of foundation that Resolve almost never changes things in the actual file. It just kind of changes how it's treated and what kind of notes it attaches to it.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi nick về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how to import media into Resolve. So I'm here in our project that we made earlier that's labeled Chapter 3. We'll just save this as Chapter 4 just to keep things really clean. And what we're going to do is add some new clips to our media pool. Now, there are a bunch of different ways to do that. One way is just to right-click in the media pool and select Import Media. And you can navigate to the media that you want to import. You could also find some media in your Explorer window or your Finder. Select it and drag it into your media pool. But a really nice way to do it is to navigate to your media using the media storage, because then you can preview it before you even put it into your project. So in your downloads for this project, you should have something called GC Intro to Resolve 17 archive.dra. A .dra has the project and all of the media files for something that you're working on in Resolve. It's a great way to kind of package things up and open it on a different system, which if you're watching this training, we're doing right now. So this is just a nice little package with all of our media in it in a format that Resolve really likes. And we're going to open this in a different way in a little bit, but for now, we're just going to find a couple files to import. So inside of this file, there's a folder called Media Files, and under Ground Control Products, Training, Intro, Training Media, we have all of our media that we're going to be working with in this training. And what we're going to be doing is importing these editing transcodes right here. These are some low resolution files that should be pretty easy to play back while we're editing, as well as some audio that goes with it. And like I said, we could take this and just drag these into the media pool and that would work fine. But in our media storage, if we navigate to that same folder, which for me is under this drive, and here's the .dra file, media files, ground control, products, training.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài
Just
nguyên
keep
dựng
twirling
phim.
that down until you get to editing transcodes and just click on editing transcodes right there. And we can switch this to thumbnail view so that we can see all of our footage. We can even close this little sidebar to give us a little bit more room. We can even take this little slider and move this up a little bit so that we have bigger thumbnails. And now it's really easy to preview our media and figure out which clips we want to import. For this little section, we're actually just going to import everything. So I'm going to select the first one and then shift select the last one so that all of these are highlighted red. And we can just take this and drag them down into the media pool. That's going to actually add these to our project. And we're going to do the same with audio. But this time, since we have this little folder, I'm going to grab this folder and I'm going to drag that not down here, but actually right over here on this left little panel. And that's going to add the audio into its own bin. It's going to use that folder as a bin in our media pool. And now we have this nice little getting organized. Do you know what I'm saying? Now that we have our media in the media pool, If we double click on any of them, we can preview it here, and we can also look at our metadata. I'm actually going to go up and just close our audio meters here so that we have a great big panel on the right side to look at our metadata. We'll get more into this in just a minute.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
In this section here, we're going to get organized. Now, this is one of those things in post-production I think is so important and it gets so overlooked. It's really easy, especially when you're in a hurry, to just not worry about renaming things, to not worry about putting things in files and folders, but you'll get yourself in trouble if you don't do it. So let's take a look at why we rename things. Let's say you have a video clip that you shot the other day and the camera labels it video 001. That's fine. It's the first video. You go, sweet. But then let's say a couple days later, you have a new camera card and you shoot something else, and the first video that it takes is video 001. And this kind of goes on anytime that you shoot. Maybe after you have 50 different video shoots, maybe you'll have 50 different files, all with the name video 001. This can be really frustrating if, let's say, you disconnect your hard drive and you plug your hard drive back in later, and then Resolve goes, I don't know where your video file is. And you go, oh, that's no problem. What's it called? It's called video 001. Oh, that's super easy. It's just one of the 50 files that I have. Honestly, this isn't a major problem all the time, but I've definitely ran into this a lot over many years of video editing. If your camera doesn't name things with, the date and the clip number and all of those things, because some cameras do, you're going to want to rename it. It's really nice to rename it something that actually makes a lot of sense for what you're doing. So if you're shooting a monster movie, this is the monster movie. Then you rename it with the project name, okay? Monster movie. And then which shoot day it was. This is day 1. And this is the clip 001. Then there is no confusion. There is only one of these that's called Monster Movie Day 1 001. Because guess what? The next day, it's going to be Monster Movie Day 2 001. Your naming convention isn't that important as long as it makes sense to you and it is unique for each file. The other thing I like to do is take any of these clips that kind of group together and actually group them together, put them in a folder. And I like to make a folder for video and a folder for audio generally. So this might be Monster Movie Day 1 video, and then you might have one for Day 1 audio. It takes just a second to do all of this, but it really saves headaches later. The other thing I'd recommend doing is renaming your project files. You start a new project, it's called New Project or Untitled Project, and you just hit OK and you start editing, right? Take 2 seconds and name it something that makes sense. Monster Movie. If you're working on a monster movie, call it Monster Movie. And what I like to do is put a number and a letter behind it. Again, you can use any system that you want, but I like this system because this not only tells me the project that I'm working on, but I like to use the number as like a great big step in what I'm doing. So 1 might be just kind of getting started, doing a rough cut. 2 might be where you're feeling really good and your editing work is almost done. 3 might be effects, 4 might be color, and so on. Those are kind of the great big categories of what you're doing. And then the letter is kind of just each version of it, right? So anytime that I make a decent size change, I like to save a new version. And it kind of ends up looking like this, Monster Movie 2A Fine Cut. And so I'll label this what this version is so that I know later where I was in the process. So 2A is the fine cut, 2B is fixing notes that other people had, 2C is picture lock, like I feel like it visually looks the way it should, 3A might be starting effects. This might seem a little bit crazy to make all of these different project files. Remember, a project file is really, really small. So it's not like you're going to fill up your hard drive with project files. But why make all of these versions? 2 reasons. One is, let's say you make some big change in your project and then you realize, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done that. I really liked how it was before. Well, you could hit Control Z and undo it a bunch of times, but chances are it probably doesn't remember all the steps all the way back to where you want to go. So again, right before I change something big, I like to make a new version. That ensures that I can always go back to the previous version if I don't like this version, and it makes me more confident. I can delete a whole big section of my edit and not have to worry about losing it forever, because if I really, really need it, I can open up this old project and copy and paste that section into my new project. The other really important thing is sometimes a project file can get corrupted. That means that it just won't open anymore. And you know how sometimes like a teacher in school will tell you, hey, make sure to do this just in case, but like it doesn't ever really happen. This literally happened to me preparing for this training. I had stuff all laid out in Resolve, and luckily I was saving versions, and my new version got completely corrupt and it crashed Resolve 100% of the time. And so I would have lost all of my work if I didn't save a version. Luckily, I had saved a version that was just like 20 minutes before, and it saved my tail big time. So do yourself a favor. Not only should you stay organized and rename things, but for the love, make new versions of your projects every time that you change something major. This is something I've had to learn the hard way many, many times. And you have an opportunity to learn it the easy way. Do it.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
Now let's take a few minutes and get organized in the media page. So we have our media imported here, and let's just take a minute and take a look at the ways that we can kind of organize this and set ourselves up for success later. Here in the upper right-hand corner, we have different views for all of our clips. And I like to generally look at things in list view because it gives you all of this information. Oh, baby. And you can sort all of your footage by any of these little categories up top. You can even right click and add new categories, and they just have a ton of them. This is stuff we'll get into when we talk about metadata, but that's a great way to take a look at any information that is available for your clips. If we want to organize these into folders, we can right click anywhere here and say new bin. And we can make a bin for separate scenes or whatever we want. This is actually all from one scene, so maybe we want to do something like wide shots. And that'll appear here in our bin list. And actually, if we go back to our thumbnail view, we can look at anything that could be considered a wide shot. I'll just boost this slider up a little bit so we can see things a little better. So here's a wide shot here. We can just drag those over. Here's a wide shot. We can really get more organized that way if we want to. And you can go as crazy as you want here, but that's pretty much how you would do it. One disadvantage of doing it this way is that to see all the wide shots, we actually have to go into the wide shots folder. And if we don't want to sort by wide shots and we want to sort by something else, there isn't really a way to kind of view them all. So instead of making just a bin, why don't we select all of these and we can drag them back to our master, and we'll get rid of our wide shots bin just by hitting delete. Now, instead of putting them all into a bin, we're just going to tag these as a wide shot. So I can select this right here, and actually maybe I'll control select anything else that's wide. So we have all of our wide shots selected here. And then over here on the right, we have our metadata panel. Again, you might have your audio meters up, but I like to just turn those off. If we make sure to go in the upper right-hand corner here under this little sort button and select shot and scene, that'll give us all these little text boxes, and we can add notes to any of these shots. So for instance, maybe for angle, we want to say wide angle. And if we have multiples selected, it's going to make this little checkbox here. And then at the very bottom, if we hit save, it'll save that information to each of these clips. And then we can do something like open up the list view, and we can right click and make sure we show angle. And now we can sort by angle by just clicking on this little angle header right here. That's a really nice way to do it. I'll switch back to clip name just to list these in alphabetical order again. What we can also do is I'll control select all of these. We can add a keyword. And a keyword is sort of similar to just filling in one of these, but with a special little trick I'll show you in a minute. So maybe we'll say wide angle and hit enter. And that will add that in that little rounded rectangle there. And again, I can go down here and hit save. And now it's tagged all of these not only with wide angle under angle, but also with the wide angle keyword. Why do we add both of these? Well, we don't probably actually need this angle unless we want it. The big thing is the keyword, because if we go down to the lower left-hand corner of our media pool, there's something called Smart Bins. And if I click on keywords and twirl this down, you see it adds a little menu item that says wide angle. And what this will do is just show you the clips that are tagged with this keyword. And so now I can just see the wide angle shots. Now, how is this different than making a regular bin? Well, a smart bin is not actually where the footage is organized like in the folder structure of our project. It's just kind of a way to sort things really quickly. So you can have clips that live in multiple different smart bins, but aren't actually in any normal bins at all. So this is great because I can go through my clips, and this is especially great if you're working with somebody else. If maybe you're familiar with the footage and you're handing it to an editor who might not be super familiar with it, you can do something like go through and tag all of your clips, like anything with Gwen.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
And add her keyword. And oops, I didn't save it, so I can hit apply and that will apply it to all of my clips. So now any clip that I have with Gwen in it will appear with a Gwen keyword, and of course makes another smart bin down here. If I click Gwen, these are all of the shots with Gwen in it. Pretty cool. There's even a fancier way to do this in the paid version of Resolve, where you can actually have it scan for different people. In fact, I'll show you this. Again, if you have the free version, this doesn't quite work, but you can right click and say Analyze Clips for People. And what it will do is search for faces, and then it will show you the different people that it found. And so we can name each of these people, Isaac and Gwen, and it can show us a preview of everybody where it thinks Isaac is in the shot, looks like all of these, and anywhere Gwen is in the shot. And then let's see other people. And then sometimes it has a hard time figuring out who it is. So you can quickly go through where it says other people and right click and tag as Isaac, tag this one as Gwen, tag this one as Gwen, tag this one as Isaac, and so on. And so now it tags two different people here. These are all the Gwen shots. These are all the Isaac shots. And this is a list of all the people. Once we've refined that, we can go down to improve people grouping result. Are they the same person? Yep. And we'll hit close. So now if we click on any of these and we go to people, here in our metadata, it's tagged it as Gwen and Isaac. You can't type a person directly in here. You have to analyze for people. So it's sort of an automated kind of fancy version of doing what we would do with our keywords, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with just grouping them with keywords if you have the free version of Resolve. Kind of works the same way. It's just a little less automated. And it is really nice to have an automated version if you have 60 shots or something instead of just a few right here. There are also other kinds of smart bins besides just the keywords. If we go under where it says Smart Bins, we right click and say Add Smart Bin, it will pop up with this little pop-up, and you can basically do just a search and it will add anything that comes up in that search to your Smart Bin. And you can search by like anything. It's crazy. So you could do something like have anything that's just a good take be added to a bin and hit create. Of course, we haven't labeled any of these as good takes. So if we go to master and we say, we watch through this and we say, oh yeah, this is a good take, we can go to our metadata and just click this box, good take. And once we do, that will show up in our good takes smart bin. So there's a ton of tools to get really, really organized here. It really depends on the type of project you're working on. If you're working on a project with, say, multiple different episodes with B-roll that's shared in between multiple different episodes of, say, like a documentary TV show, something like that, this might be really good to have kind of a library of footage that's tagged a certain way so it's really easy to find. If you're doing something like really short for YouTube, you probably don't need to go so crazy with getting organized. But one thing that I've been learning is that if I go just a little bit more organized than I typically feel like doing, it pays off. So the media page in Resolve is a really great environment for just setting yourself up for success, making sure things are labeled and organized for especially a bigger project. This is a page in Resolve that for some projects, you might be able to just skip this page entirely and just drag things right into the edit page. But the bigger and more complex the project, the more you're going to love the media page.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lích về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
When you have a whole lot of media in the media page, things can get a little bit hairy sometimes. Here are a couple of tips for situations that you might run into when it comes to adding metadata and getting organized. Something that happens a lot, and I especially see with people who are not as familiar with Resolve, is you'll be looking for your media and you just won't be able to find it. And the problem is that you're not looking in the right bin. And it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but the one that's highlighted here is the bin that you're in, and there isn't really any indication other than that. And so if you don't see all of your media, make sure that you're on your master level over here. This also gets really tricky if this little bin list is closed, because if you're in a bin like this, you're like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna just find that clip real quick. And you're like, where is it? There's no like go up button or, indication that you're in a bin other than it says right here. And if you miss this little label, it's really easy to just get lost. You can actually use these little back and forward buttons to go in between your bins. And so that's helpful too. If you don't want to open the list and then go to a specific bin, you can just move back and forth like this. The other thing, again, that happens is if you don't see your metadata over here, sometimes you're in the wrong list for sorting your metadata. And again, it's kind of easy to miss because it's just this little tiny button way up here. Make sure that you're on shot and scene most of the time if you're trying to add information about whatever specific shots you want. And again, if you can't find something, you can always go up to all groups and just scroll for 18 days.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên.
Those are a couple tips, couple little gotchas that might happen, adding metadata and getting organized in the media pool.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lích về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
A lot of the time when you're doing video production, the audio from the camera isn't very good. So generally what you do is you get a separate mic that can be a little bit closer to the talent, maybe records a little bit higher quality, and you record on that too. So you have your camera recording as well as your separate audio recording of some kind. And the idea is that you need to mix them together in post so that you actually have good audio. Let's take a second and check out how this concept works. So when you record with a camera, it records some kind of audio, and it's usually too far away from the talent. It's usually a bad quality mic. You can sort of hear what's going on, but that's about it. Then you have your microphone, which is usually closer to your talent, and that records some good audio. And our job as somebody who is editing the project is to take the video from the camera and the audio from the microphone and mix them together so that they are in sync, which means they happen at the same time. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but one of the easiest ways is just to take this good audio and line it up perfectly with the audio from our camera. And then typically what you'll do is mute this on-camera audio so that you're just watching the video from the camera and listening to the good audio. You can do this process a variety of different ways. They also have systems where the camera and the microphone have a clock on them that sync together so that they're recording at the exact same time. Then it makes it easy to, in post, just take this audio and line up the time code from the good audio with the on-camera audio. It's basically the same process, but instead of trying to visually match the waveforms of the audio back and forth, it just uses the numbers from the clock. What we're going to be doing in this training, which is I think what people will do most of the time unless you have a really big fancy setup, which is just aligning the audio waveforms. We're going to get into that in the next lesson.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ Group Tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lích về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
If you're working with a project that has audio that's recorded separately from the camera, so you have your camera files and you have your audio files, you need to sync them up so that they both happen at the same time. We're going to take a look at how to do that in the media page and probably about the easiest way to do that in Resolve. All right, so here we are in the media page of Resolve, and we have our footage here, and we also have our audio tracks. We were really good on set about always using a clapboard that shows what scene and take we're recording. This is a lesson that we've had to learn the hard way a lot of times. It kind of seems like overkill sometimes, but this really helps you be organized in post, especially when you want to sync up audio. So let's just start with our first clip here and go through, and we have scene 4, shot 5, take 5. And what I like to do while we're going through this is just tag our metadata as we go through. So with this selected, I can say scene 4, shot 5, take 5, and just put that right there into the metadata. Now I can go to the next one, scrub through. We have scene 4, shot 18, take 3. Scene 4, shot 18, take 3. And so you can go through each of these and mark them. These are actually all scene 4. So I can select all of these and say scene 4 and hit save. And then I just need to worry about the shot. So this is shot 6, take 2, shot 7, take 3.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
Shot 8, take 1. And we'll speed this up because you don't need to watch me do all of this. So now I have all of my shots tagged with shot, scene, and take. And I can go to my audio and do the same thing. We just got to listen right about where there's this little spike.
Scene 4, shot 18, take 3.
And we can tag all of those.
5, take 5. Scene 4, shot 6, take 2.
Okay, so now I have all of my audio tagged with shot, scene, and take. And now maybe I'll do something like grab all of my audio and just bring that into my master. So these are all in the same bin. And then I can go up here to my little categories for my metadata, right click, and I can choose to show scene, shot, and take. In fact, I'll turn off a lot of these other ones here that we don't really need for this time. And now we can sort them by shot or take or scene or whatever we want to do. And we can see that we have an audio that is scene 4, shot 4, take 5, and video that's 4, 4, 5. Now, this is kind of an intense process, and honestly, for a project like this, it does need to be about this intense. Normally, if you have a really simple video, you probably don't need to do all of this. You might just have 1 or 2 audio tracks to sync, but from here on, it pretty much works the same way. You can select whatever video clip you want to sync and shift select whatever audio you want to sync, making sure they're the same scene, shot, take, and you can right click and select auto sync audio based on waveform. And what this will do is analyze the sound, and it will line up that audio and attach it to the video. And we can see right here under synced audio, this video clip has a link to the audio clip. And again, we can select these that have the same shot, scene, and take, right click, auto sync audio based on waveform. And now that works. And we just repeat this process for all of our media.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.
Every once in a while, you'll find a couple clips that just won't sync, even though they are the same clip. And that's just because Resolve, for whatever reason, just can't sync them. So what we'll have to do is sync those manually later. This usually only happens with 1 or 2 clips, so it's not that big of a deal. But right now, that about does it for the media page. And now we're actually ready to go into our edit.
Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim.